When I sit down with a prospective client, one of the first things they ask me, or certainly within that first meeting, is what does a potential journey look like with YouBecome if we decide to engage with you? And that's a really good question, so I thought, let me explain that to you so you can have a good sense of what it could look like. What I want to say almost from the start is the things that I will describe to you, not all of them would apply to every single business. So there might be sort of 11 or 12 points here, but actually those points, some of them will just not apply or be relevant to you, some of them will be very relevant to you. So let's start. Okay, so the journey starts naturally with measuring. And what we typically mean by that is obviously run a really effective organizational survey, an employee survey. We obviously are very passionate about that and making sure those are done effectively. Now let's assume that we've done that, then obviously the first step really, having done the survey, so we'll use that as the first step. The second step will be all about analysis. What are these results telling us? And what we tend to do is that we will do that analysis work. We'll do that before, but when we come in and speak to a business, we tend to speak to the HR team and the senior management team. That could be a board of directors, that could be the senior partners within a group or business. But basically, what we're doing is we are giving them a sense, giving you a sense of what and how your business is. From a perspective of how are your people. We are able then to dive into the detail of how are teams, how are departments, where are they at, how do they compare? And very importantly, we also are able to, through that analysis, give you some benchmarking, give you some sense of how do we compare with other businesses that do similar things to us, and how do we compare with generally, with potentially in our geography, if we're in London or in the Southwest or Northeast or wherever, how do we compare with businesses like ours? So we have lots of things to compare you with, but ultimately what we want to know, is this good or is this not so good? Or dare I say it, is it somewhere in the middle? But either which way, depending on what comes back, will depend on the journey that you might decide to take with us. Let's just take it, for example, that the results that you have from your people are really good. Then naturally, the biggest priority is to maintain what you're doing. And therefore, usually what we find is we help you direct your focus on each department that you've got in your business and look at, are there specific things within each department that you may need to do? Because invariably, when you have a good score, that will be an average of every single part of your business. And therefore, inevitably, there'll be strong performing parts of your business and there'll be maybe parts of your business that might be struggling a little bit with. And it's really understanding the strong parts, the areas that might need support, and particularly in those areas that are struggling, what support can you provide, whether that might be some training, whether that might be one-to-one coaching, any number of different things that might be needed in order to sort of, dare I say, get the area that might be struggling up. Really what our focus is to help you maintain things. And also when we run surveys with you, we strongly suggest that you consider what we describe as pulse surveys, which are much smaller, basically much quicker surveys that you would ask your staff every 2 or 3 months, which effectively will give you a sense of whether things are continuing in a positive way. Now, if we flip the coin and we move to the negative side of it, then if you have poor results, then there's a big process that you could decide to go through. I'm going to explain to you from step 1 all the way through. But when you hear this, as I said at the start, some of this stuff may work for you, some of it may not. So let's just quickly go through. If you have struggling results, what is the journey? What's it likely? So once you've done that analysis, usually what we find is that focus groups are needed. What that means is that whether it's us that do that for you or whether you have a process within your own business that can do that, usually we strongly recommend that you work with us, because ultimately what we can do is, again, in a safe environment, we can get guys to give feedback and really understand why is it that different parts of the business are feeling in some way negative. And so what this gives us, it's a safe place for people to give that information. Second of all is our feedback and our plus recommendations. So our recommendations will be from that feedback on what specific actions you might decide to take based on what we've heard from those focus groups. There might be up to 6 action points with clear priority in terms of what will be good for you to do and move forward with. Now, depending on the degree of negativity, we often describe the process I'm going to go through as what we describe this as a reboot. Just like a computer sometimes we need to turn it off and restart it to get it back to performing at its best. And our version of a reboot, this can often form 2 different pieces. So point 3 can really look in 2 parts. One of the things that we find is a reconnect to values, and also to brand. And what that means is that values are the most important thing that a business has. These are the things that all of us as a group of employees and a group of staff feel are the most important things. So how do we treat each other? How do we treat our customers? How do we treat our suppliers? How do we behave to each other? All those kinds of things. What's important to us as human beings? And the organizational values are a collection of that distilled. And so sometimes businesses may not have those things, or they may have them, but they might need a bit of a refresh. And so that's one of the first things that we look at is how strong are your values, and if they're kind of no one really connects with them anymore, we do that. And equally, the brand. In some cases, this may not be relevant to you or not. There are very strong brands out there, but sometimes we've lost the sort of secret sauce of why should we feel proud to be working at this particular company. And so one of the things that we do is we help reconnect to the brand. We help everyone to realize, yeah, we've got something to be proud of. We've got something that we can all sort of stand behind. And that helps. These 2 exercises really help sort of just reconnect and reboot people in terms of getting them looking in the right direction, feeling a bit more positive about where they're at. Okay, so once we've done that, and particularly once we've done the values piece, this is what we call macro, high level, in other words. This is all at the macro company level. How do we then influence things at a personal level, at an employee level? Now that's what we do, is we move down into the personal, and we describe this last part as the micro. And so first things first is, once we've got the values, the first things that we focus on, the 4th part as it were, is leadership. And helping that group, anyone that has any level of management or management responsibility or leadership responsibility for others. The reason why I've connected values here is ultimately leadership has to be values driven. And that's what we call it, values driven leadership. These guys here, the people who have responsibility for people, must basically connect and behave in the way all of us want to behave. If that does not connect, then we need to think of what that leader potentially might need to do, because they won't be able to stay in that particular position. But hopefully everyone can buy into these values and then be driven by behavior. And what we do is we define what that looks like for a business, and then we assess an individual against that. We do things like 360s against the values-driven behavior to help understand and where do these individuals and where do they might need help. We also have 6 sort of half-day sessions which help a leadership team, and we do those usually these monthly. So there's enough gap for people to start developing what they need to develop and so on. So that's a big focus. Driven by values, we then look at an employee level. We don't do 360s here. It's usually just a self-assessment plus the managers help too, self-assess. What we then do is we help at an employee level, sort of how do they stack up against the values, etc. And then usually there are two or three things that each individual is working on to effectively help them become a better employee in the business. All very positive, all very focused on values, all very focused on how do we become better citizens within our business. And so once all of this is done, we then need to see how it's working. So finally, we remeasure. And what we do, guess what, is that we do that through Pulse, which is every 2 or 3 months, we take the temperature of how people are feeling, and then obviously every year we do the annual survey. So that, at a very high level, is the journey. Now, not all of those steps every client of ours will do. And so that is what we recommend. That is how we work with businesses. And so that, I hope, helps you to get some sense of if you were to engage with us, the typical type of journey that you might take.